Thank you so much for having me. It's a huge honor to be here, and obviously also following in the footsteps of Michael Solomonov, who I know was here last year. Maybe some of you saw him. He wrote the foreword for my book, and I think we have similar ideas about Israeli food. Israeli food is full of sun and spice and freshness and excitement, and it's also just chock full of ethnic influences from the Arab, Palestinian kitchens, from North Africa and Spain and the Balkans and South Africa and Ethiopia, everywhere. So when you come to Israel and eat, you're basically eating food from all over the world that's being put together in sort of unique ways. And my story is that I have a long history with Israel. This is my dad, Stan, over here, and my stepmom, Betty. And that's the perk of having grown up in Palo Alto. And I was actually almost born in Israel. My parents were living there. My dad was doing postdoctoral work. So I have a little bit of the Sabra in me, which Sabra means like someone who was born in Israel. And throughout my life, I visited, tasted my first falafel there at age 9. I can still taste it. And I drank so much carrot juice on that first trip that my fingernails turned orange, and it took like a month to stop. And over time, I eventually moved there for 5 years after college and started cooking seasonally and understanding that that was just a way of life as opposed to like a trend or something elitist. It's just the way people cook a lot, a lot of places in the world, just going to the market and seeing what's fresh. There are no avocados all year in Tel Aviv, which I know for Californians is like a crisis, and no limes all year. So I find myself juicing limes and freezing them into ice cubes so I have them for cocktails all year, or freezing mangoes for my smoothies, and just doing all the kinds of things to preserve the things that I want, but also just really learning to enjoy what's out there and to work with what you have. And the whole idea of my cookbook is that I really view my recipes as guidelines for sort of free cooking. Like, I'm a proud home cook. As you see, I'm not wearing an apron. I've developed thousands of recipes for work, for cookbooks and magazines and all kinds of stuff, but they've all been done from a home kitchen, most of them from like a tiny New York City kitchen, actually. So my recipes are really created for home cooks, and like my general philosophy, as you might see if I spill something or make a bit more of a mess than a professional chef, is that like there are just no mistakes in the kitchen. There are just like happy accidents. So like you should just cook and enjoy, and just be present, have fun, and have lots of fun, easy food to prepare for yourself or for friends and family. So in that vein, if you want to refer to your school books, page 20, we're going to talk a little bit about tahina, which is how tahini is pronounced in Israel. So tahini, this is what a jar of tahini looks like. Most tahini is made in either Palestine or Israel by Arab and Palestinian manufacturers, artisan products that are happily bought by Israelis. I like to think of it as like peace through commerce. It just kind of happens every day. Everyone's always like, oh, what's your favorite brand? Is it the one with the dove or the one with the dog on the label? Everyone has their favorite brands. And when you work with tahina, you want to hear it like shaking around. I don't know, a lot of you like me maybe grew up with the can of Joyva tahini, which has like a sludgy layer on the bottom and like a slick of oil on the top. That's kind of like tahina 1.0. Now you can get good brands like Sum Tahini, which you can buy on Amazon or in Whole Foods, or anything that comes in like a white jar with a red top. That's like a lot of them do in Israel. That's a good chance to buy. And two of the best Israeli brands, Al Arz and Har Bracha, are available now online in the United States. And in Israel, when you see a date on the top of the tahini, it's not the expiration date, it's the date that it was manufactured. So that's like something like when I went to the Shuk, if you've looked at my book at all, I live and work in the Carmel Market, which is a storied food market in Tel Aviv. So, when I first started buying tahina there, I didn't really think about what was stamped on the top. And as I got to know the vendor who's been working in the Shuk for 3 generations, he started to give me a lot of tips on what was happening. And he said, always buy the tahina that has the latest date on it, because then you know that it was ground and packaged more recently. And the more recent the tahina was packaged, the less of a chance of it separating in that way that tahini does. So Israelis are the second largest consumers of tahini, of sesame seeds in the world after China, because of tahina. Israelis consume like gallons and gallons of tahina every year, also because it's in hummus, which is another staple ingredient in Israel. I'm going to start making some tahini sauce, which is like a very basic item that everyone has either in their house or eats at restaurants. And it starts with the pure paste. And as you can see, there's sort of like a really nice viscosity here to the tahina. It's pouring well. And there are a few solids kind of on the bottom here. So I'm going to just scrape those out. If you find that your tahina has separated, you can take the sludgy bottom and the liquidy top and put it in the food processor and reincorporate it all. And then you're kind of good to go. And if you need to add a drop of vegetable oil, like grapeseed oil to it to kind of get it going, then that's fine. I'm actually going to make a double batch. But first what I'm going to do is, if you saw all those beautiful colored tahinis that we're going to be making, they involve kind of some cool ingredients that you can get anywhere. One is eggplant and the other is beets. So I'm going to char my eggplant like Israelis do. Like I've been preheating this grill here. And what you're going for is like a really, really black skin, like flaky and papery to the point where you know that the eggplant inside is really smoky. And you can use that for baba ganoush in the book. But because I like to do no waste cooking, I wanted to do something with the skin as well. So I took the skin, and you're going to see what I'm going to do with it in a little while. But we got that going there. I'm going to add some more tahina here because I'm doing a double batch.
And just to clarify, the question was for the shelf life of tahini? Yes. Is that what it was? Got it. I mean,
like a year is fine, 6 months to a year. You know, it doesn't need to be refrigerated after opening, as long as you keep it really tightly sealed and make sure that you don't introduce any water into the product. So if you get a little splash of water into it, maybe stir it in and then keep it in the fridge. But if you just make sure to keep it pristine, kind of like honey, sort of lasts forever mysteriously. It's like you always wonder, did they put something in there? So it's on a pretty high flame. This is what's called a Magimix, and I use a Cuisinart, so give me a second here. There we go. All right, so I have my garlic and my tahini in here, and I'm going to start processing this. That's on a high flame. There's also, if you don't want to grill, if you have an outdoor grill, you can do it that way. If you don't want to, in Israel, everyone does it literally on their stovetop, and then there's all this eggplant juice that comes out and messes up the grill and everything. I kind of lay foil out on my grill and poke holes in it and lift it up afterwards. But you can also broil it in the oven. There are instructions in the book for all the different ways to prepare the tahini. So do people grind their own tahini? That's an excellent question.
We gave you the tricky one.
Thank you, sous chef. Okay. Can you hear me while this is going? So in my ambitious early recipe developing days, I tried to make my own tahini, and I realized there's a famous baker named Dory Greenspan, and she said, like, when I'm in Paris, I realized, like, why would I ever try to make a baguette? You know, if you have access to like an artisan product, I would go that route as opposed to trying to make it. First of all, in Israel, all the sesame seeds are imported from Humera, which is a really fertile region of Ethiopia, and there are dozens of sesame brokers whose only job is to source the best raw ingredients and bring them to Israel. And there's kind of like a sesame stock market. So like if there's a civil war in Ethiopia or Eritrea, like Israelis start to freak out, you know, both for geopolitical reasons and also because of the tahina. So, all right, so now I've blended together my garlic, and you can do as much garlic or as little garlic or no garlic as you want. Some people put a lot of cumin in their tahina. I'm kind of like it really basic and plain so that I can play with it later. I sort of like to make it neutral and delicious. And now, as you can see, I've been chilling some ice water here. And what I'm going to do is I like to keep it as icy as possible until the last minute. And I'm going to now strain out some water without ice into another glass here. As you can see, I'm already spilling and dripping, so we're in good shape here. The recipe calls for about a cup of tahina to 3/4 of a cup of ice water. This looks a little generous, but I felt like there was a little bit more than a cup here. So I'm going to just get this going. And what this is going to do is, tahina has a very sensitive molecular composition, sort of like chocolate. If you add a little cream to chocolate at the wrong time, it seizes up like crazy, and then you have to add more. Ice water really helps the tahina build structure and get fluffy and light. If you'll see as I start to add it, that it's going to seize up and resist. It's going to be very recalcitrant. I'm using my SAT words here. and see what's happening. It's kind of clumpy, and this is not what you want. If you've done this and this is what's happening in your tahina, you need to keep going with the water. And I just realized since I'm doing a double recipe, I actually need a whole nother 3/4 of a cup. But what I see happening already is I see the tahina loosening up a little bit, which is what I want to see. And I'm going to definitely show you what it's supposed to look like when you're done. But it's kind of like making aioli. You know, when you make mayonnaise at home, you want to emulsify it by slowly adding the oil to it so that it aerates. And we're trying to aerate this tahina so that it doesn't sort of like spread out on the plate sadly. Like we want it to have some heft and some dignity when it sits on the plate. All right, so now as you can see, it's kind of come into its own. It's loosening up. It's looking good. I'm going to check on my eggplant shortly, but I just want to show you guys what this looks like here. So it's, you know, it's not watery, but it's not stiff. Like it's somewhere in the middle. It's got some nice texture to it. Okay, now I'm going to have a look over here at my eggplant.
Question for you on the aeration. So how long will this stay aerated to your liking? Would it be a day, an hour?
If you keep it in the fridge, you'll find that it actually stays quite tight, and then you're going to have to loosen it with a lemon juice or olive oil. But if you're keeping it out in an air-conditioned home, it'll last for quite some time. In a warm climate like Israel, it can tend to loosen quite quickly. But as you can see, this is starting to develop grill marks. It's still not hot enough for me. We have some Food Network magic here in the form of prepared eggplants, so I'm not too worried about it. But, okay, so we're not done here. I hope I don't need another assist here with this blender. I might.
We gave you the tricky one.
There's some things you can't teach in culinary school. Okay, so now I have fresh lemon juice. There's a recipe in the book for something called magical hummus. I call it that because the name of the restaurant that it comes from is Hakosem, which means the magician. And he very controversially uses citric acid in his hummus with tahina because he believes that the lemon juice curdles the tahini. As I was talking about that molecular structure, I don't know how I feel about it. I put that recipe in the book because his tahina is amazing, but I feel like citric acid's a little hard to find. So if you need to swap in lemon juice, that's fine. And also because you've added so much water to the tahina, it's going to accommodate the lemon juice in a more welcoming environment. It's not going to curdle or do that. So I'm going to just add lemon juice here. And I have some tasting spoons here. I'm going to taste it. Also, I definitely need to season this tahina, but I love how fluffy it is. It's looking good. It's tasting good. It definitely needs more lemon juice and salt. So I'm going to add more lemon juice. And then I'm going to add like a generous amount of salt. Salt is so important in all cooking. It adds structure and flavor. It helps you identify what the ingredients are. You know, when people say, what's in this? You know, you can taste the garlic more accurately if you put a good amount of salt in a recipe. It also helps you use less sugar in desserts because it amplifies the sweetness of things as well. So I'm going to just give this a taste. I know it seemed like a lot of salt, but for a huge amount of tahina like this, it actually wasn't. Using the back of my spoon. Don't worry. No double dipping. Okay, that's getting there. I'm actually going to add more salt. And then we're going to, so now this is what's called tahina sauce. If you go to Israel or Palestine or many Arab countries or Jewish homes in the Middle East, everywhere, a lot of people just have this in the house, and I use it as a base for so many things in my book. Like I have cherry tomatoes that you just roast on a sheet pan. And then if you're having people over and you have this in the fridge and someone says, we're coming over in 30 minutes, you can just throw the tomatoes in the oven, spread this on a plate, dump the tomatoes on with all the delicious tomato juice and goo, salt it, put a little fresh herbs and toasted pine nuts, and then you've got like something substantial to serve people. So that's kind of the idea of the book. Sound good? So these cherry tomatoes have really shocked me because they've kind of like gone viral. And to me, they're such an elemental part of the way I cook in Israel. We call it our daily kilo. We buy a kilo of tomatoes like every day or two. And inevitably people are stopping by. It's like a big function of my life in Israel that people are just kind of always popping over because they know that I cook. And we live near the Carmel Market, and it's a central place where a lot of people go. It's Tel Aviv's main artery for shopping, like outdoors in a market. So I always like to have stuff available. By the way, it was just named today by Time Out New York. Thank you, Betty, for sending me the clip as one of the top 50 coolest neighborhoods in the world. So up for me. So I'm gonna just divide this in half. This is a little liquidy, but I'm okay with it. It's looking good. Again, no mistakes, no mistakes. And now I'm going to show you how to color the trina with two things that you saw that picture of all the gorgeous colors. So this is something that kind of came to me like, I love this, but we all get bored. Like, you know, this is delicious, but incorporating more vegetables into things is always a good idea. So the first one, I'm going to check on these, for anyone who's concerned, I'm going to check on the eggplant. And also because I'm adding this, it's going to add some fiber and heft to the tahina. All right, so this is starting to, I just heard like that papery sound. So that's kind of what you want to hear. Now you're always in Israel, like you're standing, you're turning, you're angling, you're doing this. You want like every bit to get burnt. Sometimes I'll just like to be like busy. So I'll be like 10 minutes on one side, 10 minutes on the other. Like it's all good. Okay. So now I'm going to make the beautiful pink tahina in the book. So we have some beautifully roasted beets, and there's a beet and cherry borscht in the book, and there's a method for cooking beets that keeps them really bright pink. So I would recommend using that method, or I'm going to start with this and we're going to see how pink it gets. Or you can roast them in their skins in foil at 400 degrees for about an hour and a half or two, depending on the size. And then let them cool in the foil. And then when you open it, the skins just kind of peel right off if you use like a towel, and you'll have pink fingernails, but that's okay. All right, I'm all about like as few dishes as possible. So I'm going to just use the same. Okay. We'll get there eventually. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this on, and I see the magic happening. It's turning pink. It's very millennial, so thank you very much. But this is looking like a really nice color to me. And after you work with tahina like this, because you're processing it more than you ordinarily would, you can just pop it in the fridge for like half an hour and it'll firm up a little bit. But this to me looks like enough beets. Also, because tahina has so much oil in it, it's a carrier for color and flavor. So it's going to turn an even darker color of pink, like the longer it sits around. So, all right, now we've got our pink tahina. That's one. And now I am going to switch to another mixer, and I'm going to show you how to make the black tahina with the gray flecks, which is like super smoky and really surprising and delicious, and looks really cool. Okay, so thank you. Now I've got this, and this is what you're going for, people, when you char your eggplant. It looks a little sad, but now you have both smoky flesh of an eggplant and you have this incredible skin. So if you are making baba ganoush, or the smoky eggplant and feta galette that is in the book, you're going to use this eggplant itself. If you're not ready to make tahina, you can literally take this and throw it into the freezer in like a little Ziploc bag and then just pull it out whenever you want to make this tahina. I'm just pulling it off with my hands. And if a little bit of the eggplant gets in, like, it's all good. You know, that's, by the way, the word sababa, which means it's all good or it's all cool, is derived from an Arabic word, sababa, which is actually sort of a very high Arabic word that means like the highest form of love. So I think that is just an interesting fact. And I love to always try and acknowledge the provenance of a recipe or a word. I think it depoliticizes the arguments about where food comes from, and just if we share, where things come from, makes everybody happy. And, sababa is an Arabic word. Israelis took it over and made it a slang word that means it's all good. And I think we can all share food and words. So that's my personal philosophy. All right, now I'm going to lip in the front, left to right. Got it. All right. Now you can see this happening right away. There's like these beautiful black flecks in there. I love the way this happens, and I love the way the tahina tastes. It's also, if you're vegan or vegetarian and you like crave those smoky flavors, like if you used to eat smoky things like bacon and don't anymore, this is something that really evokes that like campfirey, delicious smoky flavor. I'm going to just show it to you. It has such cool like black and white flecks in it, and you're going to have tastings of all this stuff at the end. All right, so now we've learned how to make tahina. Really simple. The prepared plain tahina will last for about 5 days in the fridge. If you add fresh produce to it, it might diminish the life by a day or two. There's a version with turmeric in there, which is really delicious. It's also super healthy. There's one that uses fresh herbs, and you could use basil, cilantro, parsley, chives, like whatever green stuff you have. Just know that herbs have a lot of liquid in them, so it might make the texture of the tahina a little bit looser. Okay, so now we've done that. Any questions while I move on to the next recipe?
Quick question on the garlic. The recipe calls for raw garlic. Could you use blanched garlic, roasted garlic? Would you ever, or do you really like that bite of the raw?
I mean, it's very traditional to use raw, but and I'm like a very unfussy cook, so I probably wouldn't do the extra step of the blanching, but you could totally do that if you want to mild the flavor. And there's another recipe in the book that's really popular for garlic confit. You just basically buy or peel like a ton of garlic, cover it with olive oil, and cook it at a really slow heat for like an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, and you get amazing roasted garlic cloves and roasted garlic oil. So that is something that you can do, and you can put the roasted garlic in here. And I saw you oohing on over the tomatoes. Like I like to use the garlic oil to roast the tomatoes, and then I'll spoon some of the garlic confit on top of the yogurt or tahina with the tomatoes. So there's a lot of mixing and matching going on, and just improvising. A lot of it's about fresh produce. So in Israel, I've been living there for about 3.5 years after having lived there for 5 years. And like August 7th, which is my birthday, is 8/7, but there it's 7/8. So like I can't tell you how many times I missed an appointment or like showed up at the wrong time or whatever because that swapping. So like it's really taken a lot of synaptic reorganization to kind of like get that. But it's a good point if you're looking at something from Israel, the first 2 elements of the date are going to be swapped. Okay. So now and you know what? Let's just talk for a minute about plating. Can I get another small plate like this? Like first of all, when you're looking for eggplant, you want to look for eggplants that feel really heavy for their size. Like in Israel, there's a type of eggplant called baladi eggplant, which is again an Arabic word, which means kind of like original or heirloom or country-like. And those are going to be less bitter. And like if you pick up an eggplant and it's really light, chances are that it's older. So that's just like one thing to consider. And younger eggplants are less bitter. And I actually think that like burning like the eggplant like this, actually, if there is any bitterness, it kind of masks it. And also a lot of moisture a lot of moisture is escaping from and water, like the bitter water that might be in the eggplant. So I'm going to just show you like a quick plating thing, like how I like to, yes?
So just another comment. I think there's a Food Lab article about adding citrus to...
Food Lab by Kenji Lopez Alt?
Yeah.
Yes?
And it talks about like what difference citrus makes to tahini or...
You're talking about the effect of citrus on tahini? Oh, if you want for more reference. So as you can see, this already sort of firmed up a little kind of on its own. So I just wanted to show you like how I like to entertain at home. So I have this beautiful tahina here with my black flecks, feeling very proud of myself. And I have just like a few simple things that I kind of always have around the house. So I have these are watermelon radishes, pomegranate seeds in season right now, fresh cilantro, and black sesame. So like I love, oops, that's a lot of black sesame. I'm going to take some of that out, but I love how just right here you have this crazy color combination. Okay, so it's like really beautiful. And then I might take a drop of olive oil and put that in there. And then maybe like a little bit of salt and some more fresh lemon juice if I had some. And then I would just take this and I would spoon it over this tahina for like a really simple, like pretty colored topping. And then it just takes it from one thing and like makes it into another thing. So you can do all kinds of things like that just to amp up. Like I have the green tahini, I do roasted sweet potatoes on top, which I love. And I always have a sweet potato around. And like it's that sweetness of the sweet potato with the herbaceousness of the tahini. This one, the pomegranate seeds give like a sweet pop to the smoky tahini. So I really like that combination as well. Okay, now we're ready to, I'm gonna shift over here. I'm gonna turn off the grill because we don't need this eggplant anymore. If anyone wants to take it home, first come, first serve. And I'm gonna bring out my prep here for my burekas. So how many of you had some form of a bureka in your life? So burekas are one of those foods that many cultures claim and are proud of. And mostly in Israel, they have roots in the Balkan kitchen, like all those countries, Turkey also, and Georgia, you know, that whole area. But Israelis have kind of claimed them as like a national food. And in Israel, they're usually made with commercially prepared dough that bureka shops buy and then make into burekas. Do we have a pastry brush?
Yes.
Thank you. So I just wanted to, this is a box of phyllo dough. This is my preferred. If you want to do like a project, you can make your own bureka dough. But again, I'm into like quick things that you can make and enjoy. So I unfurl this package of bureka dough, and this recipe calls for 2 pieces, I believe. So usually when you have a package like this, so this package is a little bit broken, but I'm not going to let that bother me. And then there are a few pieces that are usually kind of broken at the top. So I would just take those and discard them. And then I'm actually going to move the dough. Thank you. I'm going to cover the dough because it dries out really quickly. And I'm going to grab a side towel and I'm going to cover it with that as well. And thank you, Chef Didi, for prepping me so well for this demo.
Oh, my team.
So yes, all of you. So I know where everything is, which is like shocking. And I can just do what I need to do without concern. So when you're working with phyllo dough, you want to keep it covered because it dries out in a second. It's like paper. And there's a very small amount of moisture in it. And you're going to need to fold it. So what I do is I keep it covered. And then I take a piece, and then I'll lay it here. And I'm going to work right on the counter here. This is actually how they work in a lot of bureka shops because the counter is cold marble. So another fortuitous win for me here. Pastry brushes here. I'm going to bring this prep over here. So most burekas in Israel are filled with either cheese or potatoes. I'm going to put this here so we can see it. Cheese or potatoes. I flip mine a little bit and I fill mine with sweet potatoes and kashkaval cheese because I had those in the house the day that I developed the recipe. And I like that kind of improvisation with cooking. And also I just like to put my own twist on traditional recipes. Like a lot of my food looks familiar but tastes different. So schlug, which is a Yemenite hot sauce that a lot of you might now be familiar with because it's so popular, they sell it at Trader Joe's. Usually it has, you know, jalapenos and cilantro and parsley and salt and garlic and a lot of different spices. And I add cardamom to mine just because that immediately transports the eater like right to the Middle East. And that's kind of like what I'm always wanting to do. I want you to feel like you're hanging out in the Carmel market and, you know, buying spices with me at my favorite vendors, a lot of whom have been working in the market for 2 or 3 generations. There's a story in the book about a family named the Amranis whose grandparents opened a spice shop in the shuk, and every year they would gather thousands of sweet peppers from all over Israel and dry them in their courtyard and rooftops, and then the family would grind all the peppers into paprika, and that's what they sold at the store. And that's how spices used to be made in Israel. Now, most of the paprika is imported from Hungary. There's sometimes like small batches of things that are local, and there are certain spices that are definitely local, like zatar, which some of you might be familiar with, which is a blend of hyssop and thyme and sesame and salt and sumac, which is like delicious tart spice. But those are the stories that I tried to capture in the book as well. I talked to all these people every day. I had to kind of unwind my impatient New York personality where I was like waiting my turn And now I just kind of hang back and listen a lot and ask a lot of questions. And the vendors started realizing that after like the 20th visit that I wasn't a tourist on an extended trip, like I actually lived there, started talking to me. So I've brushed the first piece of phyllo with olive oil. You can use butter, which is delicious. Olive oil is very standard in the Middle East, and it's a good choice too. And what I'm going to try and do is stack the second piece like right on top of the first. This piece is a little bit papery, so I'm going to discard it as well. I'm going to take another piece here. So this is not something to be worried about. You could also take this and brush it in olive oil and then twist it and make like delicious like phyllo twists. Sort of, that's the kind of stuff that I like to do. But for the purposes of today, I'm going to try and get a whole piece that I can use. Okay, this one looks great. I'm going to line it up here. I'm going to put it down. Perfect. And then I'm going to brush the top of this with oil too. Anyone have any questions about phyllo dough, burekas? What I've done is I've roasted sweet potatoes here in the oven in foil. Like I'm not worried about them getting any caramelization on the skin. I just want the flesh to get soft. So I wrap them, poke holes in them and wrap them in foil so that they cook as fast as possible. They usually take about an hour. Oh yeah, so there's an incredible spinach and cheese is a really good one. We were talking about the dish that you're going to taste. So I learned a recipe from a woman from Saloniki in Greece, which had a very storied Jewish community that actually was perished in the Holocaust. But there are a lot of Greek Jews in Israel, and they really carry on the tradition of bouzouki music, which is Balkan music, and all of this kind of food. And my friend Shiley, whose picture is in the back of the book, I tried to put a picture of all the people who taught me how to make dishes to honor them, because it was such a pleasure that these people, you know, came into my home with me or invited me over and taught me to cook these things. It's like such a treat. That's like my joke is like, don't ask me twice to come over because I will be there. Just tell me what time. So she makes something called burakitas, which are really small burekas that have an entirely different dough, which the recipe for which is in the galette in the book. And she makes this smoky eggplant and feta filling with dill and garlic. And that would be amazing in these as well. And, you know, sometimes being an outsider in a culinary culture is a good thing because I can step back and say, oh, I don't have to use plain potatoes. Like, why don't I just try sweet potatoes? And no one's going to be like, oh, you know, that you're ruining my grandma's dish from Saloniki, you know. But what I did try to do is get permission or the sign off from everyone in the book. Like, she taught me how to make her small burakitas, and I sort of floated like, how would you feel if I made a big round of dough and filled it with the eggplant filling and then kind of folded it over like a rustic galette? And she was like, that's a great idea. I never would have thought of that. So I love that I was able to take the original things and, you know, get the buy-in of the people who taught me how to make them and make something new that ultimately shares their tradition, but with my own kind of twist. Phyllo dough is a laminated dough, which is a very long, involved process of layering cold butter into sheet after sheet of dough and folding and fold. And that's how you get like thousands of layers. You can make another kind of pastry that's going to be similar, like you could fill it the same way and do all the same things, but it won't taste like it'll be much crispier as opposed to like that sort of, you know, with thousands of tiny, beautiful air bubbles and holes. I think it's a great idea to try, and there are all kinds of pastries in Israel that are made with phyllo dough, but I wouldn't call it a croissant. I might call it a flaky pastry. All right, so now I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to cut down. You can use a pizza cutter or a paring knife, and you're sort of trying to make long strips because you're going to be doing sort of like origami style folding here. So now this is ready, and I don't have to worry as much about covering it because it's covered in olive oil. So, but what I am going to do right away is rewrap my phyllo, and I wouldn't. This is something that you're going to buy in the freezer department of the store, but I would not recommend refreezing it. You can keep it in the fridge. If you refreeze it, it's going to develop moisture crystals, and then when it defrosts, like it'll get clumpy and kind of unusable. So I would recommend having like a really large bureka making party and trying to just use it all at once. But so I like to return it to its plastic and then put it right in the box right away because that's kind of the best way to protect the dough.
Adeena, I have a question. So just a quick raise of hands. How many people have had horrible challenges with phyllo dough? How many people have never worked with phyllo dough? So can you give a couple tips in addition to like sourcing? What do you look for in the freezer? How do you thaw it? All those good stuff.
So if you're going to go to a Whole Foods, that phyllo factory is a decent brand. But if you live in a neighborhood that has like a Middle Eastern shop, the people who own the shop probably use the products and can tell you what the best brands are and how to use them. So that's sort of how I do my whole life in the Carmel market. I just ask tons of questions. I'm always trying with cooking, like every time I cook with somebody new, I feel like I'm going to learn a ton. And that's always how I approach it, whether I'm working with Candace Nelson from Sprinkles or someone who's doing a vegan book or Chrissy. The idea is that the author has as much to teach me as I can lend to the process. So the same goes with vendors and people that you're trying to ask questions of. Just ask tons of questions. There are no stupid questions when you're cooking, and that's the way to go. All right, so I'm going to take some sweet potatoes here, and I asked for a masher and I got a baseball bat. So I'm going to mash that, and everyone, whether they have a professional background or are a studied amateur, has something to contribute to cooking, and it's always about learning and making something new and better. So that was that. So now I've mashed the sweet potatoes here. And I'm going to add, this is, in Israel, I use something called kashkaval cheese, which is a really sharp cheese from the Balkan region. It's also known as kaseri. Some of you might have heard that, or kaseri cheese. So I'm going to add that in. And here we used white cheddar. And the book always has suggestions for things that you can swap in if you can't find, if you can't find that. So I'm going to just make this mixture. And what the cheese is going to do is it's going to lend a really delicious savoriness to the recipe. And then I'm maybe going to add a little bit of black pepper. Or actually, it's interesting. I was going to make some pita chips. I'm not sure if I have time, but I have sumac here, and I think I'm going to add it to here because I love the tartness that sumac adds to things. Sumac is a berry that you grind, that is ground into a spice, and it adds a lemony, citrusy flavor to things. And it's very common in Israel and also the countries that are bordering the northern border of Israel, which is near the Galilee. It's called Galilean cuisine, Lebanon, Syria. And I just love what it adds to food. So I have that. And now I have my mixture. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 spoons, and I'm going to take about 2 to 3 tablespoons of the filling, and I'm going to pretend like I'm forming a 4-inch square at the top here. You don't want to overfill, but you want to have a substantial amount. And I'm going to add 2 more here as well. 1, 2. And now I'm going to show you how to fold them. So you start from one corner, in theory. Just going to lift this up, yeah. And then you're going to fold it over the side into a triangle. And then it should quite naturally, you just follow the shape of the phyllo. And what I love about it is that it also corrects itself. If there are tears, you kind of cover them up, and like you were talking about with the croissant, you're creating flaky layers here. So that's what's really nice about phyllo. Without having to be a professional pastry chef, you can make these beautiful layers. So basically now I've made this, and if you have a little extra, you can just kind of fold it over. And here is another. I'm going to just go and fold into triangles here. You can make them smaller. If you're having a party, you can make minis for hors d'oeuvres. You can make giant one as a main dish, but this is a really good size because they're really fun to pick up with your hands and just kind of eat like a snack. They're really portable. So now I'm going to just do 3 for the purposes of this demo. But I've got these here, and I'm going to brush them on both sides with a little more olive oil or butter because that helps develop the color when they're baking. And then what I did to sort of further make the recipe my own is, how many of you have had something called a frico, which is like a Parmesan crisp or a cracker? Basically what you do is you take a mound of finely shredded Parmesan cheese and you spread them on a baking sheet, and they spread out and make those lacy crackers that you sometimes get with a salad or a soup. Or if you take it out of the oven right away and shape it, you can melt it into a bowl, into a bowl shape. So I love crispy, crunchy things. I'm kind of obsessed with them. So what I do is I grate a ton of Parmesan cheese, like right on the top. And if you look at what page is the Barreca recipe in the book? 106. Okay. So now this is a great example of why I think this book is so useful. So I called for finely shredded Parmesan, which you use a microplane grater to make. So in this kitchen here, there was no microplane grater, so the cheese got a little bit more coarsely shredded, but that's fine. Like, it's going to come out a little bit differently. It might take a little bit longer to brown, or the stuff on the sheet. What I do is I take the cheese and I just go to town with it here, and I make sure that there's also a lot of cheese on the board, because you'll see what's going to happen, again, through Food Network magic. I'm going to just cover this with a lot of cheese, and it's going to create like a crunchy top, and also like a little bit of that Frico cracker effect on here. So these are ready to go in the oven. You could add sesame seeds to the top. You could add nigella seeds, which are an oniony flavored black seed, indigenous to the Middle East. And those are ready to go. Whoops, and I'm now, voila. I'm just going to show you what happens when you pull it off the sheet. Like, this is like my heaven. There's like this crispy, crunchy stuff on the sides. So the more cheese you put on the sides, the better you are. And herein concludes my cooking demonstration. Phyllo dough is totally neutral in flavor. It's essentially just made from flour and water. It's machine sheeted into like super thin sheets. There are traditional manufacturers in Israel and other places where they still hand make the phyllo dough. And that is a whole nother experience. It's special, but it's very local and it doesn't travel well. So chances are you're going to have to go to one of those countries like Turkey or Israel or anywhere in the Middle East to experience that flakiness. One of the recipes from the book that a lot of people seem to be making are the tahini blondies. So I'm more of like a caramel, butterscotch, peanut butter, vanilla type of a person than a chocolate person. Sorry, that's, I know, problem for some. But these blondies, I thought originally of like a peanut butter bar that I loved as a kid, and tahina and peanut butter are just kind of like 1 degree separated, the nuttiness. And then I added 2 types of toasted sesame seeds to it. And then I really wanted to add one other thing that would just kind of like really take it somewhere else. So I add cardamom to the blondies. And they give that warm spiciness, but like Americans are used to like a cinnamon flavor. And so it's like, you're like, this is kind of familiar, but I'm a little uncomfortable, but in a good way, So I used cardamom there. I use it again in my schlug. Also, my cold brew recipe in the book is like a basic cold brew recipe, but you put a cinnamon stick and 10 cardamom pods in the coffee. And then the next day when it's ready, it just has this incredible, takes you like to the Turkish bazaar. It's so delicious. And I also have a date sweetened almond milk in the book. And I use that along with the cardamom cold brew. And it's just a fabulous combination. There's a really simple recipe for pita chips in the book. I mean, you can buy pita chips, but I mean, I kind of feel like, has anyone ever used up like a bag of pitas? There's always like 2 left. And you can throw them in the freezer and then collect them. And when they're ready, you just sort of cut them in triangles, toss them. And, I have a recommended spice blend, but literally use anything you have in the house. If you have togarashi, toss them in togarashi. If you have cumin and paprika and pepper, do that. If you have olive oil, great. Grapeseed oil, also fine. It's really, you can custom spice them, and if you just have salt and pepper, also good. And it's just about developing like a really nice crispy chip that you can use to dip. You could also use fresh pita, crudité, challah bread, kind of anything that you want. So some people use the tahina salad that I made and throw that right into the hummus because it's all seasoned. And some recipes, all of the seasoning is in the hummus recipe itself, and you just add the pure tahini paste. My recipes are the more pure, like you just use either cooked chickpeas that you've soaked overnight. Also, the Instant Pot is amazing for cooking chickpeas if you want to experiment with that. And then I like when I'm making hummus to sort of custom make it so that I can season it exactly how I like. What I like to say about Israeli cooking is that it's as much about like the vibe of the cooking as the ingredients themselves. Israeli society is still very spontaneous. It has a very Middle Eastern feeling. there's a lot of spontaneity of life, of stopping by, and like it's a looseness and kind of a sunny casualness of cooking that I think is very indicative of the society in general and also the cooking, and it informs the way that I cook as well. I think Israelis also, they're really good at either like really long cooked dishes, because Israel is centered around the Shabbat, the Sabbath tradition, and traditionally in religious homes you don't actually cook on Shabbat. So there are all these things that are made before that can sit on the stove or reheat really nicely. So you've got that whole thing, and then you've got the super fresh, like all the vegetables, all the salads, everything, all the chopped Israeli salad, which, you know, is so simple but so good because it's just amazing tomatoes and cucumbers and fresh lemon juice and good olive oil. You know, Israel has incredible raw ingredients like right under its nose. It's got amazing olive oil and olives and cheeses and, you know, amazing fresh bread. Everything. The other thing about Israeli cuisine is the focus on freshness. Whether you're having like a tiny breakfast sandwich in a coffee shop or going to a fine dining restaurant, if it's not really fresh, it's not going to get served. The bread, if the bread is stale, if the lettuce has a little brown, it just doesn't, it wouldn't go over well. So, and it's something that I really tried to incorporate into my cooking. So to have the option of making something that's more fancy, but the ingredient isn't as good, I'd rather just go for like the perfect tomato or cucumber or kohlrabi or whatever I have.
So Adeena, you demonstrated 3 recipes. There's 120 plus. If we had 3 recipes that you must do in this cookbook, in addition to what you've demonstrated today, what would they be?
Oh my God.
I know, right? Choose your favorite, right?
Yeah.
Choose 3 of your favorites. Must-dos, not favorites, must-dos.
So there are some like sleeper hits in the book, kind of. There's a tabbouleh. Tabbouleh is just a really traditional salad that has you know, in America, tabbouleh is more grain than herbs, but in the Middle East, traditionally, it's really mostly chopped fresh herbs and a little bit of grain. You can use, obviously, you know, bulgur, which is traditional, or if you're gluten-free, you can use cauliflower rice or quinoa or whatever. And then my recipe has a bunch of toasted nuts and tiny, tiny chopped avocados in it, which just makes it like a creamy, crunchy, lots of herbs and really surprising. You don't even almost see the avocados, but they really add something really delicious to the recipe. So that's one. I would say all the salad dressings are really like multi-purpose. Like the New York Times this week featured the book, and they included a recipe for the tahini glazed carrots. So basically you roast carrots in the traditional way, and then you make this amazing tahini glaze that has date syrup, which is Ceylon, but you can use maple syrup or honey if you can't find it, and tahini and lemon juice, and there's cumin. And, you know, so you use it on that, but I always recommend making a double or triple batch because it can also be a dip for vegetables and, you know, and then I would say really go deep on the front section of the book, which is like all the staple items. The whole book is kind of based around making all these condiments like harissa paste or that hot slug. The slug, for instance, traditionally in Israel, it's used just to brighten up like meat dishes or soups. So I marinate lamb chops in it with fresh mint, and then I grill lemon wedges and squeeze it over for the cooking. Or I have a pesto in the book, and then I add a little bit of that slug, and it brightens up the pesto, and I serve it over like really easy to make ricotta dumplings. So it's all about like having a basic thing and knowing how to make it into a lot of other things.
Well, you mentioned earlier that if we invite you over to the house that you'll be there. So huge round of applause. I'm going to invite you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.